Welcome to the Wise podcast, hosted by me, Kate Conway, and kindly sponsored by ID They are the UK and Europe's leading provider of grounds maintenance services and landscape creation projects. They actively engage with social enterprises to build them into their supply chain. Today, I'm glad to say I'm joined by Jenny Irvine from ARC Healthy Living Centre. What's your job title?
Chief Executive Officer.
So, how long has ARC? It's ARC Healthy Living Centre.
Yeah.
What is that?
Activating Rural Communities, it actually stands for. So it's a project based in a very deprived area that is delivering health and social care services, basically.
And that's in, where did you say it's Irvinestown? Yeah, which is, where in relation to Enniskillen?
Between Enniskillen and Omagh.
So quite, as you say, rural?
Yeah, rural.
Tell us a bit about that community.
Oh, it's a really great community to work in. It's a very good mix in relation to demographics, really good community relations, positive attitude with the people. Honestly, I have to say, and I know it might sound like I'm saying this, but it is a really great place. When I came to work in Irvinestown, I was so impressed with the people. I moved my whole family there. We lived in Enniskillen, so.
I was just going to say, your surname's Irvine.
I know. It's great.
Is it your town now?
seriously plays this one, Lady Irvine. Yeah, no.
But your background's in nursing, and then now you're the Chief Executive Officer.
Yeah.
So how did you go from nursing into working for ARC?
When I was actually working as a nurse when I saw the advertisement for the role in Irvinestown. There was a really good reputation in Irvinestown for cross-community work, so I was really interested in working for that company. And I don't know why they took a chance on me, other than the fact that I had done some funding applications successfully, and they had plans to develop a health project. So,
so it just worked.
It. Yeah,
it just worked. So it's a charity that have what are the different arms? Because I think it's like an octopus. There's lots of different things going on. What's happening?
There is. I act as the chief executive over the whole range of social enterprise companies there currently. But the original company, the Fairs and Markets Trustees, were set up by deed poll in 1908.
1908.
So the deed's registered in Dublin because it was pre-partition. So it's a really historic group.
Should be one of the first.
Yeah, they were. Irvinestown was a plantation town, and there's a large country estate, Castle Irvine, Neacairn Castle. And when under the Wynnum Act, when they were selling off the tenancies, at the end of that there was some surplus lands and the rights to the fairs and the markets. And it was a really good example of a very historic social enterprise because 14 trustees came together at that time to develop that, and they weren't granted it. They bought it for in the region of £700 in 1908.
Wow. And
they were all volunteers. Even the structure was interesting because there were 7 Roman Catholic, 3 Church of Ireland, 2 Presbyterian and 2 Methodist. So there's really grounded history.
Proper cross-community from your roots. So what do you have then? What are the different... So you said there's a group of social enterprises all sort of working together within ARC. So what do they do?
The trustees, I suppose, were the grandparent really, and they ran the fairs and the markets. They had some properties that they let for low rents to try and encourage business. They would have been responsible for bringing electricity to the town, involved in the development of the water pumping station. They built some social housing in the 30s. And then, I suppose, as the statutory sector took more responsibility, they stepped back a bit, but they continued to meet monthly. In the 90s, with the European money, they decided that they would start to maybe develop. But one of their first projects, they realised that the trustee status was pretty unsafe because they were all held singularly and severally responsible for anything that went wrong.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So a new company was formed, and that was ITEC, Irvinestown Trustee Enterprise Company, and that was a limited company. So that really had the structure that suited the larger scale capital developments. So the trustees existed, but a new company was formed, and it brought in more people. The thing with the structure of the trustees was because it was quite rigid and traditional, there wasn't a huge amount of succession planning or rotation. I think at one point we looked at it, to leave the trustees you had to be certified criminally insane or die.
Right, okay.
So
there's only 2 ways out of this thing. Yeah.
There's 2 ways to go. So then I suppose the limited company was much more modern in its way, but it was still very much an economic focused company. And they were really actually successful in bringing forward community regeneration. So there's 55,000 square foot now of community-owned workspace in Irvinestown, so that's
Wow.
really significant.
Yeah.
But they were more from a business perspective. So the social piece was really, they were terribly interested in doing something, but they weren't, maybe they felt always they didn't have the right skill base to develop that. But ITEC, what they did is they tried to support the development of community partnership that brought together all the social groups as well. So that community partnership, although an informal structure at the start, that became the basis for the ARC. And within those social projects, now there's over 37 groups that feed into it, but you had everything from baby and toddler groups right through to the age concern groups and all of the social and sports groups in between. So when all of those groups came together, they began to identify the shared issues of social concern. So the economic was starting to happen on one wing, the social was falling behind. So there was high levels of unemployment, which I suppose was an economic, but also had a social dividend. There was a lack of community transport, a lack of affordable childcare. People were concerned about the use of drugs and the dependency on alcohol in the area. So all of these social things came together. And I suppose the groups felt individually they couldn't begin to solve them, but collectively they had more strength. So from that group, the ARC board was formed. All of the original directors came from the membership of the community partnership, and that was formed then as a limited company, but also a charity. So the three actually still exist. There's the trustees, ITEC, and the ARC. And the beauty of the model currently is the surpluses that are created in the economic side are reinvested or redistributed back to the charity.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
But the interesting thing is ITEC and the trustees they have created huge employment through the work space that they've developed. With that, in that 55,000 square foot, there's about over 200 jobs, 250 people employed. But they themselves have a very small core staffing team. Their costs are very low. Whereas the ARC, as the charity, it started with one staff member and it's grown now to 62 staff. So
significant.
Yeah, it is. It's the largest employer now in the area, so that is.
That really, really is. So what are I had sort of described it as like an octopus, but you've said actually 37 groups came together, so it's a lot more. It's a pretty leggy octopus here. So what are the different kind of strands then within it?
Well, I suppose the issue of the economic and the social working in harmony is really effective in Irvinestown. It means there's no internal competition as such. There's a really collective and collaborative approach to pretty much everything. And I suppose groups realise that even in the issue of transport at the start, that in the past maybe every group would have wanted a minibus, but they didn't need it. So they were responsible for really beginning to work collectively to resolve the issues. And one of the first projects they began was a rural transport project that's expanded now and has legs of its own, and again it serves the whole of the county. But it's those types of collective issues of concern. How it works really is ITEC probably and the trustees manage property, but more than that they manage the social cohesion piece as well. The trustees still run an interdenominational carol service, for example. So all of the church leaders come together. There's not an individual one, it's everybody. And I think that was hugely important in the context of Northern Ireland, because community relations are very strong in Irvinestown, and maybe other periphery towns that's not the case. There's no segregated housing. People, live collectively, and the history of people working together meant a community actually gets on very well. So even our summer schemes, everything are shared. The trustees also did things like supply and be responsible for the Christmas lights. So, the small towns don't get a big dividend like the large towns do, but still it's something that's hugely important. They promote trade in the area. They're trying to encourage inward investment and really be positive about rural towns and rural living.
Well, you spoke very highly of the community there at the start of the interview, but also whenever we spoke on the phone before today, you said that there was no damage or theft, and it was just the community just all kind of are very nicely formed. Very
well. We weren't without our problems, Kate. I don't want to gild the lily too much here.
Yeah.
When the ARC was established, we did have real problems. the estate that the Ark is based within, 50% of the houses were void then. There was a very significant police presence
Do you
within
mean
the
empty?
area. Yeah,
Right,
they were
okay.
empty. The houses were available but weren't lived in. People wouldn't take a house in that area. There were very high levels of antisocial behaviour and crime and fear of crime. The problem wasn't really, it wasn't of the community, it was the fact that people were placed together with very little infrastructure in place to support them. So if anybody wanted a house from anywhere, the only option at one point maybe was an estate in Irvinestown. And, that in itself caused issues for the people that had lived there a long time, but also for the people that were moving in from outside of the area that didn't have connections or support. And very quickly, when you talk to local people in the area and they describe what it was like to live through those times, they were really difficult.
And would you say ARC has come in and has definitely helped the community? How would you say you've addressed the needs?
I think the without doubt, yeah, it has, because it exists in an area where where morale once and hope was very low. Prior to the Ark, there were two nuns actually from the Order of the Poor Clare, the Sisters of Mercy, that had lived in the estate for 17 years prior to the Ark opening, the two sister bridies actually. And the nuns in Calcutta were praying for the nuns in Sally's Wood. And that was really, at the point it was, it's funny now, but one of those nuns was an original director, and she'd had such hope that change was possible, and it absolutely was. I have to say, there were really good people in the area in a bad situation.
Yeah. But ARC has come in and you've provided different services.
Yeah.
Which services?
All the services really were pretty much, I have to say, when we came in first, maybe we had an idea of what services might be needed, but we reframed that based on what people told us, pretty much. Because people, when we asked, that one of the first things we did was a piece of research where we actually had an in-depth conversation like this, really, with people to ask them what the issues were for them. And they said the issues were that you couldn't get a job if you put Sally's Wood on an application form, that there was a lack of trust, that maybe there's an expectation of failure or an expectation that you would...
Right, okay.
So all of those things, there weren't opportunities for children. There was a huge incidence, I suppose, of police call-outs involving nuisance behaviour with children in the summer. They weren't bad kids, but they didn't have opportunities. There was never a baby breastfed, apparently, in the estate. And PSNI, or at the time it would have been prior to that, or you say would have suggested that 88% of all Fermanagh crime was orchestrated in this one estate. So, those were the challenges that existed. And it did, by listening to people, we responded to what they said. People said, the issue is, I say I'm maybe trying to peddle a smoking cessation programme to a mother that said, listen, there's somebody peeing in my garden and I can't get my kids to sleep at night. So stopping smoking at that point was nowhere on her radar.
Was not on her wheelhouse? No.
Absolutely not. So it was about changing that and, addressing the things. One of the first things we did was put in an application to apply to be a Sure Start area. So we were accepted with that. Originally it was just 3 miles. It was meant to be a pram push area, but I thought you wouldn't like to push a pram 3 miles, and it was very rural, so we covered a very rural geography, and that expanded quickly, that we cover now every ward that's a Sure Start ward in Fermanagh. But the core base is still within Sally's Wood, so the headquarters, even when we grew, the headquarters was always there, and that was really important, I think, for the community, that they felt that we hadn't got too big, and that we were still...
you're still theirs?
Yeah, we're still there.
So which... So what exactly do you do, like on a daily basis? Is it childcare? Is it...
It's a bit of everything. Sure Start is one of our big projects, and we have about 1,200 children enrolled in that programme, and that's very much the under 4s. We're supporting the parents really from pregnancy right through to that transition into school. In addition to that, then we have after schools provisions. We have support for children as they go through primary school and as they transition into secondary school. So that's a huge part of what we do now as well, particularly now in the summer. and we'll have up to 200 kids on a daily basis.
Oh,
And
okay.
yeah, I mean,
In your centre, in the...
well,
one
no,
of them?
usually it would have been, and we ran for 7 weeks. You know, it wasn't a 7-day scheme. It was when the schools were closed and there wasn't opportunities, we were providing that support. It will look different this year because we can't do the things we did before. You know, we have to be mindful of infection control, but we're still doing it. You know, we're just going to be more creative, and, you know, we're not going to be able to travel. But in a way, that's quite exciting that we'll be able to use what's on our doorstep. And even when we were looking at the specifications for people that were working with us, we're thinking this year we'll give people opportunities, because in the past we might have required people that they could drive. This year that's not an essential criteria, so even more people will have opportunities, you know, to work.
The job opportunities, yeah.
To work with us. So we do that. We have services right through from, I suppose, pregnancy to services for older people. And a lot of our services, you know, are hugely well regarded and very popular. One of our least popular services at the start was probably our low threshold addiction services. But I have to say it's one of the projects that I feel personally most proud of.
Tell me a bit about that.
Well, when we started, there was a huge issue in the area in relation to addiction, and it was really, a lot of it was alcohol. There was, you know, I mean, don't think in rural areas we don't have illicit drugs. There, you know, there was heroin addiction in our community when we started, but by way and far the most problematic substance of use was probably alcohol. We would have a lot of people that were drinking at dependency levels, and really, you know, they were living in absolutely, you know, dire conditions. I remember early on we were able to get a placement for a man's dog, but we couldn't get any services for the man himself.
I don't believe it.
He was living in a house with no windows. He was permanently, you know, drunk, maybe incontinent, living just in such tragic circumstances. And that's when we realised we actually wanted, I remember early on ringing a fantastic girl. She was the Western Drugs coordinator, but she was an American lady at the time, and I rang her up to say, you know, you're going to have to do something about this. And she just batted it right back at me. And, you know, she says, what are you going to do? And I was like, oh, you know, we don't know anything about this at this stage. So we had to learn quickly. I probably said for the first 4 years, if anyone else can do this better, please come and do it, until I realised nobody was coming. And then we started a service just really working with people where they were at. There was never a compulsion for people to stop drinking or using substances. They could come into our services under the influence, but gradually over time I think there was a realisation that that people's behaviour, you know, when they felt, I suppose, cared for, then, and they were, that then the addiction was resolved. But I think the first part of it was just very basic harm reduction, giving people food, you know, trying to negotiate even with the landlords to get glass back in the windows, things like that. And it was, you know, there was the issue of it's not our responsibility to put glass in. You're going, yeah, I know it's not, but all the heat's going out that hole in the wall, you know. So it was, but I have to say we've a very, very good relationship now with all of our statutory partners. And at the start it mightn't have been as good, because I suppose there was maybe a bit of mistrust on both sides. You know, every time a house was filled, to us at that point, it was really important to get those 50% of houses filled, you know, with families, and to have the place vibrant again. But it nearly seemed at the start, every time a house was allocated, it brought a new set of problems. So, you know, but I have to say, we got through all of that, and we've a fantastic relationship now with our statutory partners.
So you really do seem to reach out into every aspect of their lives that there would be a need.
Yeah, that's it. Need is the thing. It's based on need, not about what we think the issues are, but actually empathetically listening. And sometimes, you know, when you do things that address the needs, I mean, even the addiction programs at the start, when we asked the community what the problems were, and they were saying, well, you know, it's the issue of drunkenness, and we developed low threshold services, and then we went back and we asked the people again, and you know, they said, well, you know, that's maybe not what we wanted. So they're going, what did you want? Well, we wanted you to get rid of all the alcoholics. You know, so, you know,
they wanted just to move them out,
yeah,
rather than right.
Yeah, so I suppose it's at the point that, you know, it's about the humanity of the thing as well, and a wee bit of compassion and working with people where they're at.
Yeah, the compassion and just listening to what they actually want. Because you did tell me on the phone about hiring youth workers.
Yeah, Yeah, and we've just actually interviewed again this week, and I'm so excited, you know, to see it go. But at the start, the first event, when I said we asked people what they wanted, the first event I remember the kids actually came down to our bottom room, and we asked the kids what they wanted, and they talked about, you know, the services they wanted, and they wrote the job descriptions for the first youth workers, and it was, you know, it was so funny because that first ad in the paper, I still think, you know, I know even with HR now they'd probably throw us out, but the kids said we want people that are nice and kind. So, you know, that was, I think, our first job description. Youth workers wanted must be nice and kind.
Nice and kind. And it just says everything, doesn't it? That was what was off the top of their head, rather than, oh, people who will teach us football, or, you know, I think that was just people to be nice to them.
Well, one of the other things, one of the little girls said, she said, we wanted to be flexible. I'm thinking, oh, that's brilliant, yeah. Then I thought, what exactly now do you mean when you say flexible? Me thinking like an adult, that she meant work in the evening. So she says, Jenny, they should be able to put their leg over their head. That'll be a fun interview.
What's happening that they would need that to be a... Oh, jeepers. So, but it's, as you said, you had to kind of go in and see it through their eyes rather than through your eyes.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, with so much in life, that is true, isn't it? You know, you really don't understand anything until you see it and you understand it from the perspective. It's a bit like, you know, I, you know, did nursing, and, you know, when I worked on gynae or maternity before I had a child, you know, and then, you know,
it's a different story afterwards.
You have opinion on parenting before you become one, you know, then.
And what would you say keeps you going? Because obviously that's a really challenging job. You know, as you say, it's you know, you think you're going to be able to go in and say, oh, I'll do this and we'll provide this, and then they go, no, that's not what we want. So it's been a challenge. What would you say has kept you going through that?
Without a doubt, the people, you know, really and truly, we have fantastic people. The board of directors are really inspirational people. The staff themselves are funny. You know, there's a black humour, but they really are funny. The people that we deal with on a daily basis, you know, they really are. They're just great people, you know. Surround yourself with good people. And even our neighbours, I've actually talked about, you say that, you know, when we started, when we opened the Ark, there was this assumption, I think that the council at the time, our application wasn't supported, and there was a statement made, the windows won't be in overnight in that building. We've never had damage or vandalism. We've great neighbours. And actually, before we opened at the first event in the Ark, we're actually having the ITEC board to try and show a bit of, you know, solidarity and support for this project in a really what was seen as ropey area at the time, but had no tea bags. I went herring next door to banging the door, going, you know, this guy Paul, can I borrow some tea bags? And, you know, even to this day, he always reckons that, you know, he can for his lifetime come in and get a cup of tea in the Ark because I own.
He owns it now.
True,
purchased
true,
with
you know.
80 tea bags. Is there any particular other moments that you kind of go, when I think back to that's why I did it. Like any kind of sort of the impact, sort of just even like a story of somebody who, you know, whose life you saw change as a result of this. Or?
Oh, you do. I mean, you've. I mean, for me, it's you just look outside now, and you just, you know, people talk about transformation or transformational change, and I suppose it's such a privilege to have lived through that in that area, and to see people talk about their address with absolute pride. You know, I see kids now saying things like, "We're so lucky to live in Sally's Wood," and that always gets me. I think one of the first years we did the summer scheme, and a little girl came in at the end and she said, "Jenny, I can't wait to go back to school." And I thought, what have we done wrong? Seriously, you know?
Yeah.
And I asked her, you know, why? And she said, well, every year when we go back, the master makes us write about something we did in the summer, and I never have anything to write. And this year I can just write pages. And that really got me. I just thought, gosh, that's what it's about. It's about giving children experiences and the opportunity to have something that so many of us take for granted.
Do you feel proud to talk about themselves?
Oh, I do. I mean, and even I have 3 kids. The oldest, you know, were off the payroll, but even the youngest, he was a couple of years ago, and he was chatting about the summer scheme, and he was involved, and he said, "Mommy, this one wee girl," I'll have to say her name, she says, poor Ruby can't go to the final party of the summer scheme." I thought, that's terrible, why not? Well, she has to go to Spain. So it was just this idea that, imagine having to go away and not be able to
she'd have to go away and miss the party.
So yeah.
Jenny, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing the stories and just your experience at ARC. Is there any, as a result of this, are you hoping to kind of link up with any sort of companies or are you willing to kind of have other people approach you with questions? What?
Oh yeah,
like to happen?
Absolutely. And I really think, the one thing I'd like to say, particularly people that are starting on the journey, that, honestly believe it. And do, and it is possible, and you will get there. And I know I'm saying, the 20-year timescale, that looks a long time, but you'll see the change starting to happen quickly. And all of the things along the way, I suppose the moments when people said, like, the windows won't be in overnight, it's to say to people that I suppose are starting and in the same position, if you believe it, and if you honestly engage in a very ethical way with the people that you seek to serve, you'll get there. And change is possible. And just, I suppose, the things I wish somebody had maybe said to me 20 years ago, and that's for the companies that we engage with, even the partnerships, to be respectful. And, it just, I have to say, there's very rarely a day now that we don't approach a challenge in a way that, it's difficult, but we'll get through it. Even through COVID, I think it was a great example. It was a real opportunity to actually get back down to what's really important in the community. So all of that, and not to say that I don't mean for a minute that the administration side's not important, it is. But we just got to do the real things again. And even if it was the distribution of food or if it was service to kids, just phoning people that are a bit lonely, it grounded us. So yeah, just don't assume anything. Ask. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's the piece.
That's good advice. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Tune in next week when I'll be joined by Tara Mullen from Refuge Chocolate. Thanks again to Jenny Irvine from ARC Healthy Living Centre. And also to ID Verde, our sponsor. If you're a social enterprise and you'd like to find out more about opportunities to work with ID Verde, please contact Amanda at Social Enterprise NI.